The church that shouldn't exist. This record was found where history attempted to erase itself, in the forgotten archives of a county that no longer exists. The tale I am about to share with you concerns a settlement called Bavaria, not the German province, but its namesake in America's heartland. A place where immigrants brought their traditions, their hopes, and something far less welcome. If you remain with us until the end, perhaps you'll understand why this file should never have been revealed, and why certain structures are best left buried beneath the soil of memory. Bavaria, United States, 1898. A settlement of predominantly German immigrants nestled in the hollow between three hills, where the morning fog would linger until noon, and return promptly at dusk. The town possessed that particular quality of American frontier communities, a place simultaneously new and ancient, where old-world traditions strained against the promise of reinvention. The architecture reflected this tension. Log cabins stood alongside half-timbered houses that might have been transported whole from the Rhine Valley. The town square featured a clock tower, meticulously maintained, though residents would later claim it never kept proper time. The pride of Bavaria was its church, St. Gertrude's. Unlike the modest wooden structures typical of frontier settlements, St. Gertrude's was built from stone quarried from the surrounding hills. Its spire rose unnaturally high, as if reaching for something beyond the clouds. According to town records, construction began in 1871 and was completed in precisely 27 months, remarkably swift for such an elaborate structure. More curious still was the absence of any architect's name in the official documents. The townspeople attributed the design to a collective effort led by Father Heinrich Mauer, who had arrived from Germany the previous spring. What remains undisputed is that by 1898, St. Gertrude's had become the center of civic and spiritual life in Bavaria. Town council meetings were held in its vestry. Children were educated in the adjacent schoolhouse. The bell marked not only the hours but births, deaths, and every significant moment in between. It was on April 17, 1898, a Sunday after Easter, that the first unexplained incident occurred. Called to Bavaria regarding mass disturbance at morning service. 23 parishioners reported identical symptoms, sudden vertigo followed by auditory hallucinations described as whispers in an unfamiliar tongue. Most curious, each afflicted individual insisted the episode lasted several hours, though witnesses confirmed the entire incident transpired in less than 5 minutes. Have collected blood samples but expect to find nothing beyond the effects of collective hysteria. The frontier mind is susceptible to such influences. What Dr. Elliot failed to note in his official report, but confided to his personal diary, was that upon entering St. Gertrude's, he experienced a peculiar sensation himself, the distinct impression that the interior dimensions of the church did not match its exterior. The strange occurrences at St. Gertrude's might have remained a footnote in medical journals were it not for the arrival of Professor James Blackwood later that spring. Blackwood was an ethnographer from Boston, documenting the preservation of European traditions in frontier settlements. His correspondence indicates he had no particular interest in Bavaria until receiving an anonymous letter containing a single sheet of parchment, what appeared to be an architectural drawing of St. Gertrude's, though with curious annotations in a script he could not identify. From Blackwood's Field Notes, May 3, 1898. Bavaria presents as a typical German-American settlement, albeit with an unusual degree of isolation for a community of its size. Residents are forthcoming about most aspects of their history but grow reticent when discussion turns to the church. Father Mauer has twice postponed our meeting. Curious discrepancy observed, town record state population as 512, yet census data from last year indicates 647. Will investigate further. Blackwood's subsequent entries document a methodical investigation. He interviewed elderly residents about the church's construction. He studied town council minutes, birth and death records, and even geological surveys of the surrounding hills. He made detailed measurements of the church interior and exterior, confirming what Dr. Elliot had intuitively sensed, the spatial dimensions simply did not align. Most significantly, Blackwood discovered that the stone used in St. Gertrude's did not match any known quarry in the region. According to his notes, the material had peculiar acoustic properties, and would occasionally emit a faint resonance without any apparent stimulus. On May 18, Blackwood finally secured an interview with Father Maurer. The transcript survives only in fragments. Blackwood, the cornerstone bears an unusual marking. Is it a consecration symbol? Maurer, it is, older than any consecration. Older than any church. Blackwood, the design resembles pre-Christian Germanic runework, would you not agree? Maurer, what you see as a church, Professor, is merely the outermost layer. Like skin upon flesh, flesh upon bone. Blackwood, I don't follow. Maurer, the true structure exists in the intervals. Between stone and stone. Between word and meaning. Between heartbeats. The transcript ends abruptly. That evening, Blackwood made a curious entry in his journal, the handwriting noticeably altered. It breathes. I placed my hand upon the wall during Vespers and felt it expand and contract like a living chest. The parishioners must feel it too, though none will acknowledge it. Their singing masks the sound of its respiration. I wonder if they built this church, or if the church built them. The following day, Blackwood visited what locals called the Old Foundation, the remains of a previous structure that had occupied the site before St. Gertrude's. Located in a densely wooded area half a mile from the church, the ruins consisted of a circular stone arrangement partially reclaimed by the forest. From his field notes, May 19. Native American in origin, or perhaps older still. Stones positioned according to astronomical alignment. Summer solstice would direct light to the precise center. Curious markings on inner faces of stones, similar to those on church cornerstone. Local lore suggests area was considered forbidden ground by indigenous peoples. Will return tomorrow with sketching materials. Blackwood never made that return visit. According to town records, he departed Bavaria unexpectedly that night, leaving most of his belongings at the boarding house. The official explanation cited a family emergency in Boston. However, a telegram sent by Blackwood to his colleague at Harvard tells a different story. Discovered correspondence between Maurer and excavation team Stuttgart stop church built to specifications from older site stop not replica but translation stop acoustic properties allows something to emerge stop do not attempt contact stop am leaving tonight. What Blackwood discovered in those final hours remains unknown. His research materials were reportedly destroyed in a boarding house fire 3 days after his departure. Father Maurer, when questioned about their conversations, claimed they had discussed nothing beyond the ordinary history of the parish. But something had changed in Bavaria. Town council minutes from the following weeks show increasing references to disturbances during church services. The school adjacent to St. Gertrude's was temporarily closed due to what was described as structural concerns, though no repairs were ever documented. Most telling is this entry from the Journal of Elizabeth Gruber, the town midwife, dated June 7, 1898. Another stillbirth today. That makes 7 since Easter. All with the same malformation of the inner ear. Dr. Elliott says it's likely due to a deficiency in the water supply, but I have delivered babies in this town for 22 years. Something has changed. The mothers all report the same dream during pregnancy, standing inside the church while it empties of air. By midsummer, a peculiar silence had fallen over Bavaria. Visitor accounts describe a town going through the motions of normal life, yet unnaturally quiet. The church bell, once rung for every occasion, now sounded only for Sunday service. What transpired on Sunday, August 14, 1898, exists in 3 contradictory accounts. The official report, filed by County Sheriff William Hayes, describes a tragic accident. Fire of unknown origin commenced in church vestry approximately 10:15 a.m. during morning service. Structure consumed rapidly despite rainfall. Fatalities estimated between 40 to 50, identification ongoing. Surviving witnesses report disorientation due to smoke, impeding evacuation. Recommend structural inspection of all county churches to prevent similar tragedy. The second account comes from Dr. Thomas Elliott, who arrived at Bavaria shortly after noon that day, responding to reports of mass casualties. His official statement corroborates the sheriff's version, noting that most deaths resulted from smoke inhalation rather than burns. His private diary, however, tells a different story. August 14, what I witnessed at Bavaria defies medical explanation. Bodies arranged in concentric circles around the altar, not collapsed near exits as one would expect in a fire panic. No evidence of struggle. Expressions frozen in what I can only describe as rapture rather than terror. Most disturbing was the condition of the remains, desiccated beyond what any fire could accomplish in so brief a time, as if the very moisture had been extracted from tissue. Sheriff Hayes refuses to acknowledge these anomalies in his report. The church itself, while severely damaged, shows burn patterns inconsistent with any fire I have studied. The stone walls appear melted in sections, yet the wooden pews directly adjacent show only minimal charring. The third account exists only as a partial transcript of an interview conducted in 1927 with Maria Weber, one of the few survivors of the Bavaria incident. Weber, then residing in an asylum in Indianapolis, provided a testimony so disturbing that the interviewer abandoned the session partway through. Interviewer: You were present at St. Gertrude's on August 14, 1898. Weber: I was late. Always late. Mother scolded me for it, but it saved me that day. I was approaching the church when the singing changed. Interviewer: Changed how? Weber: First, they were singing hymns. Then they were singing something else. All together, perfect, but not in any language I knew. And not with their voices either. Interviewer: I don't understand. Weber: Their throats were moving, but the sound was coming from the walls. From the spaces between the stones. Father Maurer was at the altar, his arms raised, and behind him. Interviewer: Yes. What did you see? Weber: The altar wall was opening. Not cracking, not breaking. Opening like a mouth between breaths. And through it, I could see, not the outside, not the trees behind the church where they should have been. I saw a great distance. A vastness. Something moving across that vastness toward the opening. Interviewer: What happened next? Weber: Everyone was still singing, still standing, but leaning forward now, swaying toward the opening. I called out to my mother. She turned and looked at me, but her eyes were reflecting something that wasn't in that church. Something that hadn't arrived yet. That's when I ran. I ran until I reached the Weber farm 3 miles away. When I finally returned with my uncle and cousins, the church was ash and stone. There was no fire by then. Interviewer: And the other parishioners? Weber: They found the bodies. Or what they thought were the bodies. Interviewer: What do you mean? Weber: They weren't empty enough to be bodies. A body is what remains when a soul departs. These were more vacant than that. Interview transcript ends. Whatever occurred that August morning, its immediate aftermath is a matter of historical record. Bavaria was abandoned within weeks. Some residents relocated to nearby settlements, while others returned to their native Germany. By year's end, county maps had been redrawn, and Bavaria existed only in land deeds and death certificates. Father Maurer was neither among the dead nor the survivors. No record of his whereabouts after August 14 has ever been discovered. Sound of static, as if from an old recording, briefly overtakes the narration. In October 1898, a geological survey team reported that a sinkhole had claimed what remained of St. Gertrude's Church. By spring, the surrounding buildings had been dismantled for materials, and nature began the process of reclamation. But the most disturbing document relating to Bavaria emerged much later, a letter dated December 1899, sent by Professor James Blackwood to the director of the Smithsonian Institution. By this time, Blackwood was residing in a private sanitarium in Vermont. The letter, never officially received or acknowledged, was found among his personal effects after his death. I have determined the purpose of the Bavaria structure, and why it was built to those precise specifications. It was not a church in any Christian sense, but a tuning fork. The proportions, the materials, the positioning, all designed to achieve a specific resonance. The congregation was incidental, merely the necessary organic component that, when arranged in the proper configuration and induced to vocalize at the correct frequency, would complete the circuit. What they summoned that day was not some demonic entity from Christian mythology, but something far older and more fundamental, a distortion in the fabric that separates dimensional planes. The church was built to create a temporary overlap, a momentary communion between our reality and what exists in the intervals between defined states of existence. Most disturbing is my recent discovery that Bavaria was not unique. I have identified 7 other structures across America and Europe built to identical mathematical proportions, though outwardly appearing as different architectural styles. All constructed within the same 30-year period. All positioned along ley lines that, when mapped, form a pattern identical to the marking on St. Gertrude's cornerstone. I believe what happened in Bavaria was merely a test, a localized experiment before something larger is attempted. The other sites remain intact, waiting. I have tried to warn the authorities, but my reputation is now too compromised to be taken seriously. One final observation: in my dreams, I have returned countless times to that church. Each time, I notice that the interior space has grown slightly larger than before. As if, having been opened once, it continues to expand, even in memory. Bavaria exists now only as an absence, a clearing in the woods that hikers occasionally stumble upon, unnaturally devoid of large vegetation despite the passage of time. Local maps mark it simply as Old Settlement, if they mark it at all. The County Historical Society possesses a single photograph of the town, dated 1897, a grainy image showing the clock tower and, at the edge of the frame, part of St. Gertrude's spire. Attempts to digitally enhance the image have consistently failed, the relevant section dissolving into indecipherable pixels. The land where Bavaria once stood has changed hands multiple times over the decades, yet remains undeveloped. 3 separate attempts to establish farms in the area were abandoned within a year. A 1967 plan to build a highway through the site was rerouted after several surveying teams reported equipment malfunctions and inexplicable auditory phenomena. In 1978, a research team from a nearby university conducted soil samples from the area where St. Gertrude's Church had stood. Their findings, while never published in any academic journal, are preserved in the personal papers of the lead researcher. Sample analysis reveals unprecedented microbial activity at the site, particularly in what would have been the church foundation. Organisms demonstrate properties inconsistent with known taxonomic classifications. Most notable is their acoustic sensitivity. Cellular activity increases dramatically when exposed to sound waves between 16 to 19 Hz, just below normal human hearing threshold. Recommend immediate quarantine of all samples and site restriction. Perhaps most haunting are the occasional reports from the few families still residing in the vicinity. They speak of a phenomenon that occurs during certain atmospheric conditions, when a heavy fog descends and the wind falls completely silent. At such times, they claim to hear distant singing carried on the air. Not from any particular direction, but seemingly from the spaces between locations. A local folklorist recorded this account in 2012 from an elderly resident who wished to remain anonymous. My grandfather told me about the Bavaria church when I was a child. He wasn't from there, but from a town about 10 miles east. He said everyone in the county knew something had gone wrong in that place. After it happened, people would make detours of several miles to avoid passing near the site. He told me that in the weeks after the tragedy, before the town was completely abandoned, travelers would sometimes see lights moving among the ruins at night. Not lanterns or torches, but a pale illumination that seemed to emanate from the air itself. And sometimes, they would see figures walking in procession around where the church had stood. Always at a distance, always silent, and always more figures than there were survivors. My grandfather made me promise never to set foot in that clearing, not even in daylight. He said the church didn't burn down so much as it burned through, to somewhere else. And sometimes, he said, things still move across that threshold, in both directions. What remains of Bavaria today is less a physical location and more a persistent question, a footnote in historical records that resists conventional explanation. The official account attributes the town's demise to fire, economic hardship, and the natural dissolution of frontier settlements as America modernized. Yet the absence of Bavaria persists more profoundly than its presence ever did. It is a silence that seems to expand rather than diminish with time. A negative space in the landscape that grows more defined rather than fading. As if what was lost there continues to resonate, vibrating at a frequency just beyond perception. In the words of Professor Blackwood's final journal entry, found beside his bed on the morning of his death, some architectures are not designed to contain space, but to create it. Not to house the living, but to birth something else entirely. Time, like sound, travels in waves. It breaks against certain moments, certain places, creating patterns of resonance that echo forward and backward through history. What happened in Bavaria in 1898 was not an endpoint but a beginning, a note struck that continues to vibrate across the decades. Perhaps you felt it yourself, that sensation of standing in a place where the boundaries seem thinner. Where the air holds a different density and sound behaves according to unfamiliar laws. These are the intervals that Professor Blackwood wrote about. The spaces between defined states of existence. They are all around us, these thresholds. Some built deliberately, others formed through accident or confluence. The church in Bavaria was merely one that momentarily opened wide enough for something to pass through. If you wish to continue hearing stories that time has attempted to bury, remain with us. Subscribe and join our communion of witnesses. For each forgotten record we unearth, there are dozens still waiting in the archives. Perhaps the next file is already searching for you. After all, some stories don't want to be told. They want to be heard. Sound of church bells fades into silence.